The Westmere family's monthly dinners were less about food and more about financial peacocking. This evening in the sprawling estate outside Aspen promised to be especially unbearable. I took my usual seat near the fireplace, quietly observing while my cousins competed to see who could brag the loudest. "Just bought a ranch in Montana," Bradley drawled, swirling his wine right next to the guy who owns half of Silicon Valley. "Please," scoffed Juliet, flipping her designer clutch open with a flourish. "We just closed on a vineyard in Bordeaux, private access to the river. You can't even put a price on that kind of view." I hid my smile behind my glass of iced tea. If only they knew Eliza. Aunt Miriam's voice cut sharply across the table. "You've been awfully quiet." Bradley leaned in, his faux sympathy dripping. "We were just wondering about your living situation." And there it was. "What about it?" I replied, setting down my glass. "This cramped duplex in Seattle." He said, "Still renting, right?" "The one on Pine Street," Juliet added, figning surprise. "Didn't know people our age still rented." I nearly laughed. The Pine Street complex was my company's first commercial acquisition under Larchwood Capital. To them, I was a struggling tenant. In reality, I was the owner. "I like the space," I said evenly. "You're 36, sweetie," Miriam added with a patronizing smile. "It's time to grow up. Buy something real. Try a $1,800,000,000 portfolio of multifamily buildings, commercial towers, and yes, Westmere Square, the very property they gathered in monthly X months ago. I acquired it discreetly through a private equity arm. They'd never trace back to me. I've managed just fine," I replied. Bradley smirked. "You can't even afford a mortgage." I leaned back and let them talk, because soon the lease renewal would come across their desks, and guess whose name would be on the letterhead? Dad. Finally, glanced up from his wine glass. Now, Bradley, not everyone's blessed with your sharp instincts." Eliza chose her path. Aunt Miriam chimed in with a sigh, as though I disappointed them by not marrying a hedge fund manager or becoming a lifestyle blogger. They thought I spend my days showing cheap walk-ups to broke grad students, barely scraping by on commission checks. What they didn't know was that Eliza Green, the family underachiever, was also Larchwood Capital, the anonymous firm quietly snapping up commercial and residential properties throughout the Pacific Northwest for the last decade. Speaking of real estate, Juliet interjected with a sparkle in her eye. "Have you heard about that situation on Pine Street? Some firm bought the entire block. They're gonna knock it all down." She added with mock pity, "Guess that little apartment of yours will finally go." I kept my expression neutral. Inside, a slow heat rose in my chest. Not from shame, but from restraint. It took everything not to smirk, not to speak. I had spent years learning how to stay still while they underestimated me, how to nod politely while holding truths they'd never suspect. Let them talk. Let them sneer. I had no interest in their approval, only their eventual realization. I was the buyer, and I had no intention of tearing anything down. The Pine Street complex was a hidden gem: brick facades, vintage detailing, and rent protections for families who'd lived there for decades. I was deep in a historically respectful renovation. "Really?" I asked. Hadn't heard. "Well, of course, not." Bradley smirked. "Deals that size are way out of your league. If you get booted," Miriam said brightly, "you can always move back into the guest house. We'll help you find something more respectable. Maybe even someone respectable." "I'm happy," I said flatly, "and so is my landlord." Juliet gave a tight laugh. "You can't live a small life forever." Dear Green used to mean something in this state. It still did, just not the way they thought in real estate circles. Larchwood was synonymous with ethical growth and tenant first, investing, the antithesis of my cousin's flashy developments that bulldozed communities for clout. Actually, Dad said, setting down his glass, "This meeting's partly about business. The board's worried about the new owner of Westmere Square." I tilted my head. "Larchwood Capital bought a majority stake 6 months ago." He said, "No one knows who they are." "Possibly a foreign investor." Bradley nodded. "Has to be. These tycoons love legacy properties, if only they knew that their feared mystery investor was sitting right here in a thrifted cardigan and scuffed boots." And now, Dad continued, "they're asking tough questions, especially about our accounting practices. Creative accounting, like the way Bradley borrowed from the building fund to finance his Montana retreat, or how Juliet labeled her luxury handbags as client engagement expenses." I am sure it's nothing serious, Aunt Miriam said, her pearls twitching with unease. The green name still means something. That's just it. Dad cut in, this Larchwood person doesn't seem impressed by names. They've ordered a full audit. I watched the shift ripple across their faces, panic tightly veiled behind designer smiles. An audit would uncover more than just questionable expenses. It would crack their whole game wide open. Maybe Eliza could help, Juliet said suddenly, her tone sugary. She works in real estate, doesn't she? Maybe she knows someone at the management company? They all turned to me at once. Just like that, I was no longer an embarrassment. I was potentially useful. I mostly work with smaller residential clients. I said smoothly, nothing on the scale of Westmere Square. For God's sake, Bradley snapped. You can't even help your own family. Mom gave him a warning glance. But her silence said enough. Even Dad was back to scrolling, uninterested in defending me. They had no idea how helpful I was about to be, just not in the way they hoped. Tomorrow morning, Larchwood Capital would release a public statement effective immediately. Westmere Square would undergo major operational reform. No more shadow budgets, no more nepotistic contracts, no more charging the building like it was a family credit card. I glanced around the penthouse artwork bought with maintenance funds, couches, triple their listed price, fixtures installed by Juliet's husband's firm with bloated invoices. Anyway, I said, rising and brushing off my jeans. Some of us have early mornings. Juliet smirked off to show more rent-controlled studios. I slung my worn leather bag over my shoulder. Inside the board briefing, legal filings and renovation proposals worth more than anything in this room. No, Eliza, Aunt Miriam called sweetly. Next time, maybe dress more. Like a green. Appearances matter, I smiled. Don't worry, I said, tomorrow I'll look exactly like the Greens expect. They just didn't realize I was already the one running the show. If you've been quietly rooting for Eliza all along, don't miss what happens when the boardroom doors open. Subscribe to the channel so you're the first to see how the family reacts when they realize the nobody they dismissed now holds the keys to everything. The next morning, I stood in my real office, an entire penthouse floor overlooking downtown Seattle, and prepared for the moment I'd planned for over a year. My assistant, Kira, walked in briskly, setting a cappuccino. Beside my laptop, the Westmere Square board is already seated. She said, your family got here early, trying to charm the independent members. I smirked, imagining Bradley and Juliet working the room in desperation. Audit packets, all printed and distributed. The forensic team uncovered even more than expected. She paused. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once they know, there's no turning back. They need to learn. I said quietly that legacy isn't a license to abuse power. I turned to the glass, catching my reflection. Gone were the jeans and cardigan. Today I wore a deep navy Altusara suit, sharp lines, soft strength. The kind of look Aunt Miriam used to dream I'd wear to meet a husband. Instead, I'd wear it to dismantle their house of cards. The ownership announcement goes live in 20 minutes. Kira added, once it hits, you'll be unmasked. Then, let's begin, I said, picking up my briefcase. The Westmere Square boardroom hushed as I entered. My family was clustered at the far end, unnerved, underdressed, and visibly rattled. Who are you? Bradley barked. This is a private meeting. I calmly placed my briefcase at the head of the table. I'm Eliza Green, I said, founder and sole owner of Larchwood Capital, the company that owns this building and several others. Your family leveraged illegally. Miriam turned ghost white. Juliet's lips parted, but no sound came. My father's hands tightened on his pen. Eliza, he breathed. I nodded. Good morning. I opened the briefcase and began sliding audit reports across the table. Shall we review your financials? This is insane, Bradley stammered. You're just what I asked. The black sheep, the renter, the woman in consignment, clothes. Juliet blinked. But you show apartments. I work, I said simply, and I built something real with integrity, not illusion. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, not for vengeance, but for truth. And yet, as I looked at their stunned faces, I felt no triumph, only clarity. They had built their world on illusion, and I had quietly built mine on substance. Now, both worlds had finally collided. The board watched stunned as the proud Green family began to unravel one page at a time. These folders, I said, contain detailed documentation of every misused fund, inflated invoice and falsified receipt reports of financial irregularities involving Westmere Square's accounts. I began distributing the final set of documents. Bradley, would you care to explain the $2 million zero in roof repairs that financed your Montana property? He flushed so hard and fast, I thought he might pass out. Or Juliet. I continued flipping. The next page. Maybe you'd like to walk us through your husband's invoices, charging 3 times the market rate for basic plumbing. You'd air out your own family's laundry, like this aunt, Miriam gasped. No, I said evenly. You aired it out. I'm just making sure it gets cleaned. Dad finally spoke, voice low and pleading. Eliza, sweetheart, we can explain, don't I? Said, raising a hand. I've watched this family treat our great-grandfather's legacy like a personal atom. While you mocked my so-called humble life, I was building something better on values, not vanity. But why? Juliet asked, dazed. Why pretend to be struggling? I didn't pretend anything, I replied. I lived modestly. I invested wisely. You assumed wealth had to be loud. The Pine Street building, Bradley said, stunned. You really live there? I own it. I corrected, and most of the block. And no, I'm not demolishing it because some of us care about people, not just returns. Suddenly, phones around the table buzzed. One board member looked up, reading from his screen. Larchwood Capital reveals CEO's identity. Eliza Green, a strange member of the Green family, confirmed as owner of $2 billion real estate portfolio. Fumbled. Her phone ranked among top ethical developers. She muttered, historic preservation, tenant protections. This will ruin us, Juliet whispered, pale. No, I said firmly. This will save you from yourselves. Effective. Today, Westmere Square will operate transparently. No more shell games, no more sweetheart contracts, and if we don't comply, Bradley tried to sound bold, but his voice trembled. He smiled. Then I'll pass these reports to the authorities. I'm sure the IRS would find them enlightening. Silence thickened. What do you want? Dad finally asked. I want you to remember what the Green name meant before all this. I met their eyes. One by one, great-grandfather built communities, not just profit margins. I stood gathering my papers. You have a choice. Work with me to restore that legacy, I said evenly, or find somewhere else to live. I hear there's some lovely rentals in Lake Oswego. I turned to leave. Eliza. Wait, Dad's voice stopped me just as I reached the door. I was wrong about you. Yes, I replied quietly. You were. The aftermath unfolded like something out of a business drama. The media couldn't get enough of the hidden A's of Seattle who'd quietly built a real estate empire and dismantled her family's illusions. In one board meeting, Aunt Miriam resigned from 3 local boards, too ashamed to show her face. Juliet's husband's firm folded within weeks of the audit release, but not all of it was bitter. Arrested. Finally, facing actual consequences, enrolled in a public university's real estate program, Juliet began volunteering at a transitional housing shelter downtown. She told me later, it gave her more purpose than her gallery openings ever had. And Dad, he asked to learn the business, not as a father reclaiming control, but as a student. This time, he wanted to understand what I'd built. 6 months later, I was sitting in my Pine Street apartment. Yes, I kept it, reviewing new quarterly reports. Westmere Square was thriving, leases were stable, tenant satisfaction was up, and small retailers on the ground floor were turning healthy profits. A knock broke my focus. I opened the door to find my mother. She wore jeans and no makeup. It took me a moment to process the casualness. She had always appeared polished, flawless hair, carefully chosen outfits, subtle judgment behind every glance. But today she stood in worn denim, eyes uncertain, like someone arriving not to critique but to connect. It was disarming, unexpected. A version of her I wasn't sure I believed was real. Yet, I got your invitation, she said, holding it up. A courtyard holiday party. I nodded. It's not quite your scene. No, she admitted, glancing around my modest space, but I'm learning that maybe scene isn't everything. She picked up a photo of me at 24 beaming at my real estate license ceremony. I never asked, she said, why this path? Because I wanted to build something real. I replied, not just buy it and flaunt it. And now she murmured, you control more than all of us. I do, I nodded, but control isn't the goal. Purpose. She looked at me seriously. Will you teach me? Come tonight, I said. Meet the families who've lived here for decades. Listen, that's where legacy begins. Later, I stood by my window watching lights twinkle across Seattle, the city I'd quietly made mine. Westmere Square glowed in the distance, no longer a monument to greed, but a symbol of restoration below me. The Pine Street building buzzed with quiet life. Brickwork, original wood, beams and garden courtyards were preserved with care. My phone pinged with new messages. Partnership offers, speaking invitations, acquisition deals. Larchwood Capital was in high demand now, but I kept my schedule humane. My routine grounded success to me wasn't about outshining my past. It was about building something that mattered, something that would last. Sometimes the person they pity becomes the one they must learn from. And sometimes the best kind of triumph doesn't roar, it endures. Week later at the Pine Street holiday party, I stood by the garden fountain watching my family acclimate to a world they once dismissed. Mom sat beside Mrs. Sanchez, a tenant here for 38 years, listening with genuine interest. Bradley helped string lights with Mr. Harrison, a World War II veteran and longest-term resident. Juliet laughed beside a table of kids icing sugar cookies. Slowly they were learning real wealth isn't in what you can flaunt, it's in what you preserve, what you share, what you elevate. Dad joined me near the cocoa table. You know, he said, your great-grandfather believed buildings should shelter hearts, not just wallets. I nodded. I found his old ledgers, handwritten notes about protecting tenants. We forgot that he looked at me not like a daughter who'd gone off track, but like someone who'd carried the torch he'd dropped. You could have ruined us. Never the point, I said, watching a little girl twirl under the fairy lights. I wanted to build something that would outlast me, and sometimes the greatest success isn't in proving them wrong. It's in offering them a better version of right. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly counted out, then maybe you see a little of yourself in me. I didn't set out to prove anyone wrong. I just wanted to build something real, something that couldn't be taken away because it was rooted in values, not vanity. If my story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? What have you built in silence while others doubted you? Let's talk about it. Let's give each other credit for the quiet work, the long nights, the tough choices. And if you're facing a moment like I once did, when the world expects nothing from you, don't shout louder, just build stronger. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you're still with me, then maybe something in this story stirred your heart. Maybe you've been that quiet one in the room, underestimated, overlooked, called less than, while you quietly built something more. If that's you, then this isn't just Eliza's story, it's ours. You see, life doesn't always reward the loudest voice. Sometimes it rewards the most consistent hand, the clearest purpose. Like Eliza, we don't have to win with noise. We win with integrity, with quiet steps that hold weight. There's a line that says, "The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists." That's from a Japanese proverb, and it's true. Bending, staying rooted, growing quietly, that's strength. This story reminds us that legacy isn't what we inherit, it's what we choose to create. It's in the spaces we protect, the people we uplift, and the principles we refuse to abandon, even when no one is watching. Like Eliza, many of us are doing the quiet work. The early mornings, the small wins no one claps for, the restraint when we're misunderstood. And you know what? That quiet work matters. It builds empires, not just in real estate, but in relationships, in trust, in meaning. So if you've ever been doubted, if you're building something real in silence, I see you. And more importantly, you see you, and that's enough to keep going. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear from you. What are you building? What have you done that no one noticed, but should have? Drop a comment below, share your thoughts. Let's give each other credit for the long nights and quiet grit. And hey, if you haven't yet, like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to the channel. There's more coming. Stories about resilience, growth, and becoming who they said you couldn't be. We're not just surviving, we're building something that lasts. Together.